morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has tuned into our webinar today. On behalf of TiE Dubai, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome each of you here. As you can see in the visuals, we now have done over 40 virtual events in the last few months, and we do hope these sessions have been valuable and helpful for many of you. While I tend to repeat the information for many of our new members who tune in, I'm going to try and put this a little differently today. TiE is an amazing organization that started in the Silicon Valley in 1992 by a handful of people and has now grown to more than 60 chapters in more than 15 countries. The most amazing part of this organization is that it is run on the generosity and passion of many, many successful entrepreneurs who are leaders in their own right. They have succeeded in their journey of challenges and learnings as an entrepreneur and as a business, and some of them have gone on to build world-class companies, and the others are en route to that. Called as charter members, they are willing to give back their valuable time and knowledge to the entrepreneurial community and ecosystem to build it further. They create time out of their very busy schedules to support aspiring as well as newer entrepreneurs and businesses on their journey to increase the chances of success. A shout to all the charter members and especially the ones in the audience now. TiE Dubai was established over 18 years back to support the ecosystem in this region and has been able to help multiple entrepreneurs on their respective journeys in many different ways. Here at TiE Dubai, we run several events and programs, which many of you may find valuable. The mentorship program, TiE Women program, TiE Young Entrepreneur program for the university students. These are a few of them. And thanks to the pandemic, we're able to reach a wider audience in the MENA region. The easiest way to be a part of this community is by liking us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube to access all our events and programs. We publish all our events across the platform, so do take the time to find TiE Dubai everywhere. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all of TiE Dubai sponsors and partners who continually support us in bringing more to you. Moving on to the session for today, education. It is becoming a completely new world today for both students and teachers, and also very likely to be something completely different you and I may have gone through to get our education. This is happening sooner than later, catapulted by the pandemic. Today's discussion on the innovations in education and EdTech is brought to you by a stellar panel that can give you a new view to this industry, as well as a looking glass into the future. Moderating this conversation is Shamima Parveen. I don't think there is a better person to bring this to light. She's a co-founder and CEO of Edutech, an EdTech company that started in 1991, almost 20 years back. And her sole reason to start Edutech was to change education. In her role, Shamima plays a vital role in realizing pioneer innovations in the learning approaches and solutions across academic and corporate learning environments. A driven leader who is passionate about technology and learning, Shamima continues to expand Edutech solutions to integrate future study skills and learning methods and emerging technologies to prepare learners with future skills. I do not want to take any more of the valuable time of this amazing panel we are here to listen to. Without further ado, Shamima, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Slay. Greetings to everyone joining us virtually from all around the world. When it comes to education, everyone has a belief, and we all should. As students, lifelong learners, parents, grandparents, entrepreneurs, community leaders, we are all stakeholders in education, and we all want an education system that shapes the future of our families, societies, and economies. Of the many changes brought about by COVID, one of the biggest impact was in education. Specifically in the emergence and recognition of EdTech as a transformational tool in education. Teachers and school administrators now acknowledge using EdTech has a measurable impact on students even beyond COVID. We will see education expanding their use of EdTech even after COVID has been successfully contained and the fourth industrial revolution continues its stride. For example, GSV Ventures recently predicted the digital learning market to reach $1 trillion by 2027. As of September 2020, there are 20 EdTech unicorns around the world who have collectively raised over $9 billion of total funding just in the last decade. If you wonder what comes after a unicorn, it's called a decacorn, which I learned recently. An EdTech company in India, Byju's, is now valued at $10.5 billion, I hear. Now, in the Middle East, there is a growing interest among investor communities in EdTech portfolios and a growing list of EdTech companies creating solutions for local and global challenges. Now, EdTech is surely a space to watch for all the edupreneurs and investors out there. Today, we have a remarkable set of panelists with deep expertise in education who will share their experience and views on innovation in education and EdTech. Let me start with introducing our panelists. Hajar Ansari is the Manager of Community Communications in KHDA, Knowledge and Human Development Authority. If any of you have school-going children in Dubai, you would have heard about KHDA. Hajar is at the forefront of EdTech and communications at KHDA. Hajar works in shaping KHDA's community outreach and engages in creating meaningful opportunities to create the future of education. Transforming the potential of new technologies into real-life applications, Hajar collaborates with tech startups as part of the Dubai Future Accelerator program. Her diverse expertise in communications, partnership, creative prototyping has seen her contribute towards major projects that have impacted students across Dubai. Apart from her work in KHDA, Hajar loves solving puzzles. Welcome, Hajar.
Thank you very much, Shamima, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure being here with you and with the panelists as well. And I hope I add value to the session today. And I would like also to welcome all the participants.
We're looking forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.
I'd like to also introduce Mayank Dhingra. Mayank leads the education business vertical for Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe at HP. Mayank's role is to provide strategic direction, solution frameworks, commercial oversight, social capital curation, and thought leadership to the education business line. Mayank works with national education ministries to evangelize HP's education proposition. He's currently spearheading the development of HP's remote learning program, digital classroom ecosystem, innovation labs, and pedagogy consultancy frameworks for governments and regulators. Mayank is also a yoga ambassador and runs a nonprofit called Yoga Smriti for Children in Need. He was recently awarded by GHP Global as the most community-focused yoga initiative in the Middle East. Mayank, we're very pleased to have you. I'd also like to introduce Kathleen Delaskey, who's joining us. Sorry, Mayank, go ahead.
No, sorry, I lost you, so maybe it was my end, the issue. Go ahead, please, sorry.
Oh, so you missed your introduction of yourself. Well, we talked very good things about you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me, and hello to all the panelists and to the attendees. Look forward to it.
We also have Kathleen Delaskey, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. from the United States. It's a center of a lot of activity this week and for the next 2 weeks, as you can imagine. Kathleen founded the Education Design Lab after 8 years on the board of Virginia's largest public university, the George Mason University. A social entrepreneur, Kathleen has launched or co-launched 4 nonprofits in the past 2 decades, all related to improving the quality of education for non-elite students. With the Education Design Lab, Kathleen saw the need for a nonprofit to help learning institutions and other players design education towards the future of a fast-changing world. The Education Design Lab has supported some 125 colleges as well as employers and high school districts and regions in their move towards a skills-based economy. Kathleen was named by Harvard University's Institute of Politics as 25 people changing the world. That's amazing. Thanks for being with us, Kathleen.
Thank you for having me. And I'm a big fan of TiE. There's a very vibrant chapter here in DC, and I look forward to the panel. Thank you.
Duncan Kemp joins us from United Kingdom. Duncan is the Partnership Director for the Open University at Future Learn UK, a social and collaborative learning platform delivering courses from the world's best universities and businesses at scale. Before Future Learn, he spent 13 years as education manager for Apple, working across all levels from K-12 to higher education and adult learning. Duncan was fortunate to work with governments and schools across Central and Eastern Europe, Turkey, Middle East, Africa, and India. He was also a member of the Worldwide Education Strategic Initiative Group, developing opportunities with governments and key institutions, such as the UAE government's Foundation Year program and Open University on iTunes U. Duncan will confess to a liking for amateur dramatics and a mistaken belief that he is a photographer. Or I believe that he can be a photographer. Welcome, Duncan. It's a pleasure to have you all. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to being part of this panel. Now, we would also like this event to be as interactive as possible. So we want the audience also, we want to get to know the audience as well. So let's start with the poll to get to know our audience and where they are from and what they do, so we can make this an interactive session. Cicely, would you run the first poll, please? You'd have 1 minute on your screen to click on, and please browse through. There are 3 questions, and choose the options that most suit you. And the poll will go off in a minute. Thank you. That's great, thank you. So can all the panelists also see the poll results? Yes, that's great. We have a great variety of audience. There's quite a bit of entrepreneurs and large businesses, teacher and faculty, aspiring entrepreneurs, and from industries across as well. Thanks for the participation in the poll. Now, I will also ask our audience to continue your participation by sending in your comments, questions in the chat or Q&A session, and we will attempt to answer all of them as much as possible. Now, if we can start with the first round of questions to each of our panelists. Hajar, if you would like to go first. Can you tell us the role of KHDA in bringing about innovation in Dubai schools to prepare students for a future that is changing right before our eyes?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So basically for us, innovation is not only, let's say, a set of action or steps that are needed to be taken to come up with the new and different things, but it's also a mindset in our day-to-day work, and it's embedded within our roles and the actions and the initiatives that we have. We also have teams or different teams and roles within KHDA who take that even further. And some of the initiatives we have are in collaboration with the Dubai Future Foundation. And with these initiatives, we aim to bring the future of education forward and to add value to the educational ecosystem here in Dubai. So an example of these initiatives is one, the Dubai Future Accelerators. And basically with the accelerator, we collaborate and work with different edtech startups and to bring their solutions and prototypes and ideas to solve challenges that are relevant to the future of education in Dubai. So that's one of the initiatives, and we've been running now 7 cohorts, and we had so many different startups from all around the world. So that one. Another initiative is Rahal, and Rahal in Arabic means the traveler. And with Rahal, we aim to disrupt the education and achieve what can be achieved in 10 years, but within 2 years. And it's part of the Y10X initiative. And with Rahal, it provides us with, and provide the school as well with the sandbox in which the school can innovate and come up with different models that not necessarily applicable within the regular system. So with Rahal, we are able to explore that and enable any learner to learn the way they want and whenever they are and wherever they are. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
So anytime, anywhere learning, you facilitate that to happen across in Dubai in all schools.
Yeah,
Great.
exactly.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Hajar. Now, Mayank, working in a multinational diverse organization like HP, can you tell us what are the changes you're seeing in work environment and specifically skill requirements even before to COVID? And what's your opinion on how teaching and learning, specifically the pedagogies, should be preparing for the future workforce in a modern workplace?
Great question, Shamima. You know, we are in the fourth industrial revolution, as we all know, right? Which is really the interconnection of physical, digital, and biological spheres. So in this new amalgamated world where everything is being connected and is being cohesive, you know, I think the business industries also realized that they need to move away from last century's, you know, siloed work style, which had a lot of internal competition and so on, right? To a far more collaborative framework and culture. And in my opinion, this can be divided into two parts, right? Inter-organization and intra-organization. So when you look at inter-organization, you know, which is other organizations collaborating with each other, what we see is that, you know, there is this whole integrated enterprise sort of view, right? So people are joining hands to try and achieve something which is of a common objective, and they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. You know, if somebody's done it better, they join hands with them. There are these public-private partnerships or SPs, right? Special purpose entities or vehicles and so on. And this is where, you know, I think non-profit organizations, public and private, are joining hands and triangulating efforts to really bring about a change in what might otherwise have taken 10 years or might not even have shifted from the ground. So the ability to move projects because public and privates are partnering together. And then you have got partner ecosystems, right? And, you know, as HP, we have lots of these partner ecosystems. We've tied up with Intel, with Microsoft, and we're doing a lot of things on these with these partner ecosystems. So I think that's what, you know, the world is changing towards in terms of inter-organization. But whatever is external is also gets reflected, you know, internally, right? So from an intra-organization perspective, you've seen models like holacracy, where, you know, teams bind together and then disband after a project is over, and they're sort of self-governing, right? So they don't have that hierarchical approach, but they more have an approach of, you know, how do you self-govern and how do you make the project come to life? And, you know, IT organizations, of course, brought about the Scrum frameworks and Agile frameworks. And those are now becoming part of the normal workflow of other departments as well. So, you know, whether it's Scrum, Crystal, Agile, they have taken that kind of concept and brought that to life in an intra-organization perspective. So if collaboration is really the norm going forward and, you know, interconnectedness is what's going to happen, then of course you have to prepare students for this, right? You need to prepare students and help them master these intrinsic skills which they'll need tomorrow in life. Because all these models that I spoke about, they require disparate cultures, geographies, and thought processes to come together. And these are not attributes you can manage immediately, right? These are muscles that need to be trained. And these can only be trained in the education sphere. So if you have gone through a journey in education which has taught you how to bring people into the same tent, it taught you how to collaborate with one another, then you are already being set up for success. But if the education system has shuttered you into one single frame of thought through the formative years, then your ability to catalyze this melting pot of talent and variety of vectors and levers that are going to come to you into one direction becomes almost impossible. So, you know, the biggest skills for tomorrow are going to be the ability to handle ambiguity and master the social fabric. So obviously education needs to really respond to this, right? And one of the ways they can do it is by bringing in project-based learning. And, you know, we've seen that in IB, we've seen that in universities now. That becomes a very common way of trying to bring learning in. Peer-to-peer learning, which can be peer-to-peer tutoring or, you know, peer-to-peer assessment. These are the kind of things that allow people and students to collaborate with each other far earlier before they are ready for the employable world. The digital systems as well help in that. The learning management systems that we are seeing today, they help collaboration to happen, right? So whether it's TEDx talks, whether it's hackathons, all these new frameworks that education is trying to bring in are preparing students for this new fourth industrial revolution, which is what corporate culture is becoming about.
Thank you, Mayank. You know, what you tell me reminds me of something. I saw a video yesterday of a coding school called Ecole 42. And later on, when I went onto the website, I understood they opened in Abu Dhabi as well, that uses peer-to-peer learning with no teachers at all. And they use project-based learning and collaboration. So I'm not in any way saying that we need to have schools without teachers. That's not going to happen. We still need teachers, specifically in an education environment, who's bring together students dealing with social emotional learning aspects. But yes, it's certainly becoming true that these skills are becoming very important. And also what I'm seeing is project-based learning, as well as utilizing skill sets of students that are not just hard skills, but a lot of soft skills as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kathleen, so that brings the question to you as to, can you elaborate on the rising needs of soft skill as a critical requirement in the workplace? And how do schools and universities teach these 21st century skills, which don't get measured in traditional assessments? You're muted, Kathleen. Can you unmute yourself, please?
I just realized that's it's always job one is don't get that wrong, and I've already done that. So yeah, there've been 5 or 6 in the U.S. Where we work mostly. I mean, we work internationally. We're a nonprofit. We recognized early on that if you're going to help high schools, particularly, and colleges with this issue that Mayank just laid out so beautifully, you really have to, the thing you have to tackle is the assessments, because while most high schools or college or universities, secondary schools and universities will say, oh, we teach those skills, they're inside of our history major or our natural science major, they're there, but the learners don't see them, and the employers who we're trying to hire don't see them, and the context is not there for what Mayank just described. Is when you get into a job, you don't have that transfer skill to figure out how to do collaboration, creative problem solving, communication, critical thinking. These are all the skills that show up now as the number 1 and 2 and 3 requirements for industry and for any kind of job, through all these job scraping or these job posting scraping surveys that we're seeing around the world. The good news is we're really coming to an agreement that these are the most important skills. They're also the mobility skills for when people get laid off or need to retool. They help you transfer from, let's say, a job in retail or waiting tables to do something that might be in healthcare or in sales. And here there are a lot of studies also which are now beginning to actually break down the DNA, really, of skills to the sub-competency level, so that you can figure out, how do I, what skill do I need to increase to get over to this other career that is more agile, more automation proof, and more lucrative for my career. So we're in the US, at least, and there are a lot of startup companies that are working on this. It's fascinating what is happening with data to be able to help learners figure out their pathway and jump from one to another. And there's also really excellent software now and talent platforms for employers to figure out what talent do I have, and how do I need to shift. So the assessment is key, and I could speak to the way that we're assessing. We have a set of micro-credentials that we've created with working with employers and assessment experts, so that learners can skill up on specifically empathy, creative problem solving, communications, and we work on these what we call proving grounds, where employers tell us, okay, here's what we need to see to want to hire this person. And so then we give them, we use these rubrics and assessments to help skill up the learners.
Wow, that is really interesting, Kathleen. Thank you. Duncan, as a 50-year-old university that was relevant in the postal era, how has the Open University evolved to the cloud era, as it's called, to offer skill-based learning for the future?
Oh, Shamima, thank you. I think it would be sort of really unfair to just categorize the Open University as a university that was relevant in the postal era. The postal element was a vehicle for delivery in those days. And I think that what is true in so many places is that education is a skill in itself. It is something that is taught. It is something that should be taught as well. And what the Open University has in spades is skills and knowledge about learning and how to get the best out of people. And really what happened when it was sort of set up at the end of the 60s, it was designed to give accessibility and opportunity to those that wouldn't necessarily be able to get to university. And you might argue that in the UK environment, where 50% of people leaving school now go to university, as opposed to the 5 to 8% when it was set up, is that still relevant? There is always disparity in ability to get to learning. And things like the OU, institutions, I should say, like the OU, are wonderful in that they open up that ability and they make it possible. It's quite remarkable, really, if you look at it, how the Open University has continued to push the envelope. So, as you mentioned, when I was at Apple, we were able to bring the Open University to the iTunes U platform, which was in itself revolutionary at being able to give learning to students. And they went after 3 days from joining the platform to being the #1. And I don't believe that they've actually left that position on iTunes U since they were on there. They have these wonderful partnerships with people like the BBC, and they're able to call upon such exciting resources that really engage people. But probably better than that is that they've understood the value of social learning as well. And social learning has been an inherent part of everything that they do. They are right there at the forefront of it. The largest number of people in the NHS are there because they have done education through the Open University. The Open University is the #1 supplier of cyber skills in the world, according to a LinkedIn survey in 2020. And over 10,000 people are now actually sort of engaged in IT learning with the OU. Their boundaries are outside of the UK. They have embraced the whole of the cloud era to deliver access to learning. What they've learned to do is to package that learning. And the company I work for, FutureLearn, is a creation of the Open University. We were started in 2012 as a project within the Open University to develop a platform for online learning and skills-based learning to go out there. We offer, you know, the hard skills that we've been talking about, the technical skills that you're talking about, but also, as Kathleen was saying, you know, the need for soft skills is engendered in what we do as well. And, you know, it's very interesting to hear how all of these people, you know, need to access learning. That's why the OU is relevant. That's why the 50 years that it has been there have been a development activity. And, you know, I'd commend anybody to go and have a look. The Chancellor is Martha Lane Fox, and she's a digital transformation specialist. And it really is built around the needs for today.
Thank you, Duncan. Just to let you know, in 2003, I did my first online course with Open University. So I have deep respect for that. That's where I learned what e-learning was by experiencing it myself. Hajar, if I can come back to you. Now, it's interesting you said that you're disrupting education, because education is always considered too risky to be disrupted, which is an amazing job what KHDA is doing. But educating students today demands a very different model than educating students even a decade ago. So what new models will evolve and be accepted in Dubai?
Yes, as you said, Shamima, I mean, education has been one of the, let's say, one of the most challenging sectors when it comes to being disrupted and exploring with different models, since it takes a long time to see the results when it comes to educating any individual. So as mentioned earlier, I've spoken briefly about Rahal, and with Rahal, as I said, it enables the learner to come up with their, let's say, own model and own experience when it comes to learning. And with that, we challenge all the current regulations when it comes to education, and enable the schools and the learner to come up with their own innovative models. So that's one. Another thing is, as we are blessed to be in a country that embraces innovation and challenging the presets. Another initiative called the Rig Lab, and basically with the Rig Lab, like at any let's say a tech or innovative solutions that not necessarily have or there is no clear regulations or a challenge any current regulation. So with the Rig Lab, it provides that safe space to explore and to be able to expand it to the mass community. So with these different initiatives that we collaborate with different partners and with different stakeholders, we are able to explore and see how can we change the education system and see how we can better add value and how can we equip all these individuals and students with the needed skills as mentioned by my colleagues earlier.
Thank you. So I also have heard that in Rahal, students who have an interest in sports, for example, can take their time off to pursue that, but still be able to access their education and complete their annual years, which is what makes it possible for them to pursue their passion and complete their education, which is a great initiative.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for bringing this example. So as you said, I mean, with the, let's say, with the current rules and with the current model, as you said, the students need to be at school at a certain time and a certain setup. But with Rahal, they can build the program that meets their talent and needs, and at the same time don't lose their learning and what they need to have in order to move to a next step or next chapter in their journey.
Thank you. And Kathleen, with so much of change happening around us, just from what we hear from each of the panelists, there's so much of new developments and changes. Are traditional degrees still appropriate for preparing students for the current workplace? And what options are available or universities should be considering to stay relevant?
This is such an interesting question because in moving to a skills-based hiring ecosystem and a skills-based learning system, which we see internationally, so many colleges and other kinds of training programs and career leaning, what we call here career technical high schools or secondary schools. With that happening, the question becomes, what are the credentials that you need? Because now only something like 35% of jobs in the US, at least, I'll just speak about the US for that statistic, require a four-year degree. However, those are the best in terms of the most lucrative roles, right, often. But that is changing because in the tech sector, for example, in the banking sector, you have CEOs stepping up and saying, we no longer require a degree. You have, we had Donald Trump, our president, at least for a few more weeks, he signed an executive order recently that actually was applauded, where he said, we'll no longer for federal government jobs require any degrees for any of those roles. And his people are now running around trying to figure out how do we assess for jobs if not unwind that executive order. But it's very helpful because there are all these cybersecurity jobs, for example, in the government that have been unfilled because people can't get the degrees fast enough to fill them. And so that demand is one of the reasons it's changing, but it's also the modality of how people, the time they want to invest in a four-year degree the fact that they have to work. Degrees here at least are very expensive, and many people just can't afford to do it. So we're creating what we call micro pathways. The lab has just started a big initiative with 6 regions in this country, and we're also talking to folks internationally about creating these what are called micro pathways, which is it's a sub-degree that has 2 or 3 credentials. And by the way, to the last round of questions, one of the credentials has to be a 21st century or soft skill credential. And these are considered pathways that can get you, short pathways that get you to a credential. And we need to come up with names for these credentials, but those credentials would be good enough to get you a role that is a living wage and could be stacked. You've all heard the term stackable credentials, could be stacked to a degree if you wanted to, but doesn't have to be done right away, doesn't have to be done at all. So this idea of the flexibility of stackable micro pathways that have market meaning to employers in and of themselves, that's where we're trying to go.
That's great. And so this is what makes lifelong learning possible, I suppose, that you keep getting these micro credentials and building your skills as you go along, because the skills requirements are going to change frequently from what we are seeing.
That's exactly right. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, Stanford University came out with this idea called, University 2025. And it was this idea that we would think about college as a loop that would happen throughout our lives. And now we think of it at the lab, and many others are thinking about it more like a weave, that it will you'll weave in and out of school, that there'll be ways, because of all of the modalities that we've just talked about, that you can do school and work at the same time, that it can be experiential, that you can also get credit, what we're calling experience credit, for the things you know how to do, not just the school that you sat through. So that's been really interesting movement here as well.
That's really great. Mayank, between us both, we have seen in our lifetimes in the EdTech field many shiny new objects that purpose to change education, but fails. Now, what do you see currently as the impactful technologies that are making a dent in the universe of education? Can you give us some examples of that?
You're absolutely right. There's so many e-solutions which have come and gone, and some have stayed, right? But when you talk about impact, I think today the impact is at the fundamental level by 2 aspects, right? One is the diffusion of the learning management systems into the classroom, because they were always sort of at the periphery and the outer ring. But now, because of COVID, everybody wants to use the learning management system to manage the learning pathways. And the digitizing of content is the second thing, right? And we've tried to digitize content earlier, but it has never been interactive. What is changing now is the interactiveness of digitization or the digital content. So these 2 things are really making it possible for technology to become center stage in the classroom. Because the minute you have a digital tool which allows you to assess, which allows you to do behavior management, which allows you to do anything and everything that you were doing in a brick and mortar environment, now in a bytes and pixel environment, you're creating an impact, right? And of course, you need to have the fundamental block of the content being there, and the content has to be digitized, it has to be interoperable, it has to be engaging, and you have to find a way to make sure it's interactive. So to me, these are the 2 basic pillars of what is making an impact in terms of EdTech. And of course, there are other things that are happening around the periphery, but I think they're still not mainstream, because the flipped classroom, which we have always wanted, is now becoming a reality because of these 2 things, right? The child is now able to dictate his journey because of the LMS and because of the content sitting at his fingertips. But and when you talk about impact, we launched as HP a program called Be Online during the COVID time, which was really a duty of care program. And we said that ministries of education or private school groups, here is a program which will give you technology, which will give you a learning management system, digital advisory on how to manage this new environment, and try and manage your school year with this while you're doing remote learning. And in both Ethiopia and Nigeria, we actually had school groups which took this on and could actually give their year-end exams only because they had taken on this LMS through us, right? So they were able to save their school year. So, that is true impact, right? Where you're able to save the school year. Because right now we're really talking about which students are able to save their school year and which have had a wasted year. So to me, that was real impact. And then if I look around the bend, right, there are other things coming around, virtual reality for one, right? Because virtual reality really engages all your senses. And that is when true understanding and true retention can happen. And learning is nothing but about understanding and retention and the ability to apply that when or recall that on will, right? So the whole ability to engage your senses and to create a more deep and meaningful learning pathway, and also to ensure equity, because when you bring virtual reality into a classroom, you're now allowing a child who might not have the same income strength as another child to be able to go to all 7 wonders of the world or to go inside the human body, right? So the ability to create equity through virtual reality, I think, is what's going to truly create impact in the coming couple of years or few years, right? And also personalization, right? With AI and ML coming into technology, into these LMSs and so on, you're going to be able to truly contextualize and tailor make every child's educational journey, understand his pace, his style, and so on. So to me, these are the few things that are going to create a real impact in outcomes in the next 6 months to 2 years, let's say. Back to you, Shamina.
Thanks, Mayank. And I'm glad you mentioned these because many times the understanding of online learning is a Zoom classroom, specifically in the past 6 months. That's what many of us as parents have experienced. So there's more to learning and EdTech than being online on Zoom, which only takes care of maybe about 20% of what a teacher does in a classroom. There's just so much more interactions that the teacher is having with their students, which all of these other aspects of technologies makes it possible online. Thank you. Duncan, I have a question for you, which may be a little bit different than what we talked about, but I think you can do this.
Yeah.
How have MOOCs fared in bridging skill gaps compared to traditional higher education?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
How has programs like offered on Future Learn fared in bridging skills gap compared to traditional higher education?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I think really they have met or exceeded people's expectations is the short answer to that question, because what we're seeing is that there is much more desire to get involved in something that is short. I was very interested in what Kathleen was saying about the stackable micro-credential. And this is something that's sort of, coming forward now. The traditional concept of higher education is a lot built around an experience, I think, as much as the actual information that you put into the degree. Not everybody, and I'm one of those people, is actually geared up to do that formalized education very easily. I'm a picker. I like to graze. I like to bring in lots of different things. And so for me, when I went to do my higher education, I actually struggled with the whole degree process. I have found it much easier and much better to do small courses that I've been able to build up to actually develop skill sets. It sort of fits in, I think, a lot with what Mayank's saying in terms of how you have self-governing teams in organizations and businesses that come together, do something and move apart. You don't get these big teams that sort of, work through things now. So in what we offer, we offer this accessibility through platforms like Future Learn that people can come in. Incidentally, at least 50% of the people that are coming into our platforms are doing social learning as opposed to required learning. There is now a development in people's thinking that they want to better themselves. If you, let me talk about the UK, because that report I'm just looking at, CBI report, has said that 25 million people are going to need to upskill in the next 5 to 10 years in order to take advantage of new jobs. At least 5 million people are going to have to totally retrain. So if you try and rely on formalized education to do that, you're suddenly going to have an entire population disappear and go into learning, and there's going to be no economic building going on. you've got to sort of be able to mesh these things. And what the Future Learn platforms have been able to do, I think, better than the traditional higher education platforms, is mesh into this online learning for life piece. What we've seen with COVID is it's accelerated so many things. I spent 15 plus years, walking around talking about flipped classrooms, as we've heard today. And a lot of people would say, well, no, they won't work. You can't manage those. And lo and behold, a virus comes along, and within 2 weeks, everybody's doing a flipped classroom. Some better than others, yes. But, a lot of the things were taken away in terms of the internalization. I think the other thing that we have to look at as well is that the upcoming generation, so if you look at the demographics on our site, 25% of the people are in the age group 18 to 25. And that's the Gen-zennials, as they're liking to call them now. But these people, 98% of them have a mobile phone, 92% of them have a digital footprint. They spend up to 10 hours on screen time. They will watch 2 hours of YouTube videos each day. And this is a difference in the way they gather information. So I think this is going back to the very first question you asked me about, how has the Open University moved on? It's not just the Open University. We have 200 institutions on our platform. 90 of them are UK universities. And they are all exploring lots of different avenues. Because, we have from 26 to 45 is 50% of our platform. Lo and behold, the other 25% are over 55. There is a complete new demographic in learners. It's not the 18 to 21, 25-year-olds who are in, full-time education now. Everybody wants to get in there. So what we've been doing is we've been developing more social learning, peer learning, that allows people to become part of a cohort, to talk amongst themselves, to learn from each other, to critique and to manage those soft skills, actually, that you don't necessarily teach directly, are actually being built within the learning pieces themselves. So we are offering a 24/7 platform, and people can now drop in, take the learning and apply it. And when you look at the stackable micro-credentials, when you look at small runs of learning, as opposed to work for a year and do an exam, you get to learn, apply, learn, apply, learn, apply, which for people like me definitely works. And when you've got to do a lot of upskilling and retraining as well, that's the sort of thing you need as a business. So it allows us to take charge of our learning. It allows companies to get the best from their people, but also even if you're not in employment and you're looking for new employment, it allows you to experiment and explore. I mean, one of the things that we do is we have a freemium model, and that's part and parcel, I think, of a very important point. Learning is no longer a luxury; it's a requirement if we're going to keep up in this, rapidly changing world. You, Shamima, have talked about the fourth industrial revolution, and how AI comes into all of that. We have got to really start to look at how we support people to learn. That's where I think the platforms come in, and that's where I think it becomes important. They augment as opposed to replace traditional higher education institutions.
Thanks, Duncan. I want to bring in some of the audience questions right now. And if I could ask actually Mayank, if you can see this question from iPhone Yen, what's usually done in places where pupils and students can't afford equipments? If you don't mind answering that question. And Kathleen, if you don't mind answering Ashish Punjabi's question of using the social element of learning in schools. And meanwhile, we're going to run another poll for the audience. So Cicely, if we can launch the second poll, please. Thank you. And when we come back, we can respond to these questions.
Shamima, would you like me to answer the question now?
Yes, let's multitask.
Okay, great. So I think, since I look after Africa from education perspective, I've seen some very, very interesting things happening in places where, you can't go in for online classes. Of course, radio and TV have become broadcast broadcast mediums for that. So, governments and ministries of education have tied up with radio channels or with TV channels and sort of started using that medium to at least pass on the knowledge to children. It is, of course, one way. It's not two way. So it's, the efficacy of it is probably a little questionable, but it is one way. Some of the more interesting things that I've seen is, putting all the lesson plan on a USB stick and then making it reach the student's house. They complete their assignment, they put it back on the USB stick and it goes back to the teacher. So it's collected at a set time and place and so on. So I thought that was one of the more interesting ways. There are other things which are cap devices which Intel had come up with, which basically is a router and a storage mechanism together, right? So it's a mini server and a router. And the idea is to take that into villages or small districts where there is no internet coverage and allow everybody to come to the town hall with social distancing and so on. And at that time, take care of the lesson in terms of disseminate the information and then allow the students to actually upload their documents and so on at the same time. And then they can always next week come back and again upload that back onto the mini server. So the things like that which are happening, which I think are very, very interesting. And what I like about that is that you don't get paralyzed by the fact that you can't reach every student, because there are some governments where, because you're not able to reach every student, you have done nothing for the students that you can reach. So that I think is the biggest wrong that is happening. This whole paralysis about not doing anything because you're trying to do the utopian thing. So I think there's some very interesting things happening. And, if you watch the space, especially in some parts of Southeast Asia, South Asia and Africa, people are being really creative.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayank. I think that answered very nicely. Kathleen?
Yes, so the question from Ashish is one of the concerns of e-learning and increased use of technology is that social elements of kids in schools may get compromised. How can Edtech help keep kids social? I mean, I think we've all learned, we've certainly learned, we're running our office completely on Zoom now from around the world. And you can be social online. The issue is, you're not in person. So I think things like matching AI, we've seen interesting technologies around creating, well, online dating does this, right? But creating matching systems that help people get matched up with the buddy. We've looked at pilots for like buddy systems, so that you have somebody that you get matched with that you might not have known, that can be another student that's going through what you're going through, or is struggling with the same math sequencing that you are. And so the AI aspects of EdTech, I think, can help create more social connections, and we've all seen things like that. We're also using it for assessments. So I want to quickly bring in the other question that was directed at me here, if that's okay. Someone asking about, does the Education Design Lab provide help for startups at a stage where they might want to be piloting things? We are particularly looking for the kinds of technology that can help with making the AI aspects of assessment and peer-to-peer assessment in particular. So those things also can create social interactions as well. So I think those two questions combine. So that's an area where if you've got a startup that's working on this, sometimes we do take startups that solve a problem that we're trying to solve with the ecosystem and use them as a pilot tool. So yes, we do that, and I can put my email in the chat if people have something that they'd like to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. And another thing about kids being social online, I think they're natural at it. They're much more natural at it than we are. And I think they've always been social. They think email is so old style, right? They have other ways of communicating with each other and have much better skills around that. That's great. So we have a couple of more questions that we want to have some more answered, but the poll questions are also very interesting. What the surveys showed up in terms of what kind of changes people expect in the education system and what they think is the purpose of education as well, which is very interesting. Now, just want to actually ask a couple of questions to a couple of you. Mayank, you cover quite a large area, and what are the educational innovations that you're seeing in parts of the world that is still in development or may not have the same access to technology or connections? You answered that briefly in the previous point, but I also want a specific reference of that to the 3.7 million refugee students who are unable to attend school today. So what are some of the social entrepreneurship initiatives that can bridge this gap and help reach the UN's SDG 4 related to education? Can you very briefly answer that, because we are getting to the end of the session today?
Yeah, no, Shamli, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, because as HP, we run a program along with UNIDO and African Union and UNDP called Be Change Maker, right? And this year we ran that in Africa, and we had 315 applications from 42 countries and so on. But the reason I mentioned that is because the team that won, it was Team Invicta from Ethiopia, and their winning pitch was a platform they've created, which is a marketplace for matching refugee talent with recruiters, right? So they have found this niche, and they've said that how can we make a social impact? How can we take care of societal well-being and inclusivity and help people? So they've helped, Syrian refugees in Lebanon to Rwandan refugees in Ethiopia to find recruiters, whether it's for a temporary gig or whether it's for a permanent role. They've been successful in really creating this bridge. So I think that is one of the most impactful edtech innovations that I've seen recently, which you might have not heard of, but I think is going to scale up very, very rapidly, because we are supporting Invicta to achieve some scale. And today on the audience, there are some social entrepreneurs. They should look at Be Change Maker and see what they'd like to do with the next edition of that program. As HP, we also run something called HP Life, which is an edtech platform where we have 32 modules available for business and IT skills, which young entrepreneurs, young students can use to develop their skills or upskill themselves. And one of the programs we ran under that HP Life has been Mashroi, which we ran in Tunisia, and that we did in partnership with UNIDO, which is back to my earlier point that everything is about collaboration today, right, and triangulation. But what's really interesting is that this program has now created 1,500 jobs, and we are adding 6,000 more by 2021. That's our aim, right? So these are the kind of social impact innovations on EdTech that have really, touched my heart.
Thank you, Mayank. That is really nice. Yes, I think we need more of that. So I know we are running out of time, but I do have one more question that is, I think, very important for a number of people. There's a lot of consensus, and I think we're seeing that there has to be a lot of focus on well-being and mental health for both students and teachers, and maybe even parents. What innovations are you seeing to address this need? Any of you can answer it, but whoever wants to answer it in very, very short time. Thank you.
So let me take that, Shamima, since nobody's going for it.
Okay.
I teach yoga, as you know, and so on. So I think, tech is there to help you do the three basic things, right? Which is to eat right, move right, and sleep right. And there are devices which can, right now help you monitor what you eat and how you eat, tell you as per your body composition, what you should be eating, as per your Ayurveda dosha, what you should be eating. So utilize the tool that makes more sense for you, right? There are enough tools there to remind you to move 10,000 steps a day, or to do a HIIT program or do a yoga program, and everything is free, right? So to make use of those apps. And eventually there are apps which can shut down WhatsApp and every other kind of digital medium at night, right? So do that digital detox just before you sleep, put that phone away, and make sure that you're sleeping right, because that really is the core of well-being.
Let me just jump in as well, Shamima.
Yeah.
From a learning perspective, I absolutely agree with what Mayank's saying. But when you're building these learning pieces, it's important to build nice, short, easy to manage pieces. Things should be celebrated. Success should be celebrated throughout the course. When people do something right, make something of it. It needs to be celebrated as you move through. Have staging posts so that you can clearly see how you're moving, and make it so that it is easy to navigate, that the information is clearly displayed, particularly from an online perspective. I think that if you use lo-fi rather than high-tech approaches to this as well, it makes it all the more easier for people to get engaged and to do. Just make it easy and accessible.
And can I add one more thing to what you just said? Along with success to be celebrated, I think maybe we should also celebrate failures as well. That's also one of the skills I think we are all needing to learn in the future, as well as currently. And I think that will also make life a lot more easier for teachers, students, and parents too. So I know we have a lot of questions that I haven't answered, and some from people I know, so they're going to call me up and ask me why I haven't done that, but we are running out of time. So for wrapping up, I would like to thank all our panelists for their valuable contribution. And just before you do the survey, I have just one more thing to say. So, and our audience for your active participation with questions and comments. And we will try and get back to some of these questions through some way. I'll find out how we can do that. Now, just as a wrap up, according to Holon IQ, I just saw that the global education market is set to reach at least $10 trillion by 2030. As population growth in developing markets is expanding and technology development is driving unprecedented reskilling and upskilling needs in developing economies and in developed economies as well. I think the coming decade will see an additional 350 million postgraduates, secondary graduates, and nearly 800 million more K-12 graduates than today. And let's not forget the teachers. The world is going to need an additional 1.5 million teachers per year on average, approaching 100 million in total, in order to keep up with the changes ahead in education around the world. So what I see is that the invention opportunities in education are abundant, and for all the entrepreneurs, the challengers, the problem solvers, the change makers out there who come to this session or who will be seeing this later on, the mission is clear. We all need to be a part of the future of education and doing our bit towards it. So thank you very much for joining us today from all over the world. And we really appreciate your time and your contribution. All the best to everyone, and continue to stay safe. Thank you.